Hey everybody, in this video I'll talk about using random combat encounters as a narrative aspect for your game, and you never even have to roll a single die. The random encounter can be so much fun. It's a staple of any tabletop role-playing game. The party is on their way to the next town, or they're camping, or who knows, maybe if it's even out on the high seas, or in the mountains, or in a desert, and then all of a sudden you notice up ahead a dust cloud. Or while they're all asleep, someone gets woken up by the gibbering of a kobold or a goblin. These random encounters can be so much fun, but is there another way of doing them? Well, one way that I like to play with random encounters is letting it be a purely narrative experience. What do I mean by a narrative experience? I'm talking about not relying on the mechanics or even relying on the dice in order to move the story forward and let a lot of the role play and the fun and yes, combat, bloody combat happen in a slightly different way. You probably want to figure out if this is right for you and your players and your group. If your players absolutely love the mechanics and the rolling of the dice and the math side of the game, this might not really be right for you because it's going to remove just about all of those different things. We're not worrying about armor class as much. We're not necessarily worrying about specifics of hit points or action economy or where is somebody standing and who has advantage or an attack of opportunity. Those things might happen in the narrative combat, but we're not rolling to see where they happen. In fact, we might not even be rolling for initiative. The way narrative random combat works is that you, the DM, are going to introduce what it is that's happening. And from there, you go around the table letting all of the different players take turns narrating how the fight plays out. Now, when I use this in a game, I definitely make sure that I bring it up to my party early. I let all of the players know that this is one of the ways that I like to handle smaller fights. And I don't use it for everything. One of the things you should ask yourself is, well, what was the reason for the random encounter? Are you simply trying to show off a new type of monster that's in this region? Are you trying to let the characters, not the players, but the characters pick up on the fact that the Queen's Road isn't as safe as it once was? Do you want to show off a shift of power in some of the different military or monsters or things like that in the region? If those are the reasons for the fight, you don't necessarily need to be throwing dice in order to accomplish that. Now, it's important that I know when these fights are going to happen. I want to establish for myself and for the story why are they happening, like all of the things that I just talked about, but also I want to know how difficult do I think that it's going to be. How many different monsters or bandits or what have you are there? I still keep pretty good notes. This isn't a simpler way, but it is something that allows for a little bit more improvisation, perhaps. Also, I only use this whenever, well, let's be honest, the result of the fight is going to be that the player characters win. I mean, if the PCs aren't in any real danger, then for me, I don't know that it's always beneficial to spend an hour in combat for something that ultimately doesn't matter and doesn't affect the story that much. I want to get to the players having fun, describing what it is that they're doing and impacting the story a little bit without slowing things down with the slog that sometimes combat can become. So, for example, if I've got my party and they are camping while they're on their way to the next city and they think that this is a pretty safe area and the city that they're going to is very well protected, I'll probably still ask them, what is the watch order that you set up? Do you have people keeping watch? And I'll let them roll perception checks and all those sorts of things. If someone happens to fall asleep, or if they don't notice the bad guys, or if they do, that's when I switch over into a much more narrative way of play. Let's just say, for example, that 3 of the party members are asleep and 1 is keeping watch. They roll their perception check and it's pretty bad. Well, one of the ways that I'll do this is to say, okay, well, you're keeping a watch, but you're daydreaming a little bit, and all of a sudden you hear a weird sort of twang sound, and just as you remember what that sound was, it's the snap of a bowstring, you feel a sharp pain in your shoulder and look down and see the crossbow bolt sticking out of the armor. You've taken a little bit of damage here. Let's go ahead and get into the fight. I'll have the players go through and narrate what it is that they want to do. So if my player that has a ranger is the person that got shot, I'll say to her, all right, let me know, what are the next 1 or 2 things that you want to do in this fight? You don't see anybody, but you have a pretty good direction of where the bolt came from. And then I let the player narrate a couple of different actions. Maybe she draws her weapon. Maybe she tries to sneak out and figure out where it was. Maybe she wakes up her compatriots. I don't know. But the point is I let her describe these things. Now, if she wakes up the barbarian, that's a pretty easy segue. And I'll say, all right, your barbarian is now awake. You see your party member. She's bleeding from a crossbow bolt stuck in her shoulder. A wild eye in her look in her eye. And she says, they're out there somewhere. What do you want to do? And I go around the table. I also know when I want to interject some things. And I'll say, okay, 2 of the bandits have been able to close the distance. And you notice that they are pretty well equipped. These aren't just roadside bandits. In fact, they all seem to be wearing the sigil of a local baron that you thought was loyal to the queen. It's a way that I introduce the narrative. And we'll spend maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes going through and narrating what it is that happens. I always encourage my players to introduce complications, and they accept the fact that they get wounded or that they get hurt. But we don't drag things out with a bunch of different die rolls. We don't have to hold for actions. We don't have to figure out, oh, how close are we? Now, I do this a lot of the times with theater of the mind, but you could mix and match, and you could go ahead and have the minis out on the board and all of that kind of thing in order to have a nice visual representation of what it is that's going on. What this allows is for all of us to share in the storytelling without necessarily slowing things down, without getting caught up in all of the different dice rolls. Now again, if that's a part of the experience that you love and your players love, then maybe narrative random combat isn't really for you. But it might be fun to give it a shot. Because like I said, if this was simply to establish that there's a baron that's gone rogue and has his own small army, and the players were always going to end up winning for this and then finish out their long rest so they heal their hit points anyway, then is it worth taking a really long time to adhere to all of the mechanics of the fight when we can really focus on the storytelling and the narrative and sharing in the fun of the experience of figuring out how the players overcome the odds but get banged up a little bit along the way. Have you ever played with this type of combat situation where you don't necessarily use the dice and stick to all of the mechanics, but you focus on a storytelling narrative? Is this something that you enjoy from DM Light or DM-less style play, or some of the RPGs that are out there that don't use dice whatsoever? I think that this is something that you can use in all of your gameplay, whether it's Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Starfinder, Fate, Savage Worlds, any of those different types of things. So have you used this? Is it for you? Have you been a part of it, like at a convention, and it wasn't necessarily your favorite? Go ahead and let me know in the comments below what you think, and I'd love to have that discussion. Thanks to everybody who's a subscriber, who likes our stuff, and especially when you share. If you liked our video and you know someone that might like it as well, go ahead and share it with them. That's how we grow, and that's how we get to meet so many of you. Everything that we do is possible because of the love and support of our patrons over at Patreon. So thanks to all of those, and especially to Arvi. If you'd like to become one of our patrons, then head on over, find a tier and that's right for you, get some perks. You get a little bit of ownership here at Roll for Initiative, and it is a really cool thing to do. So until next time, I'm Ryan. This is Roll for Initiative. Thanks. Bye. In fact, they all seem to be wearing the sigil of